Hello and welcome to our latest podcast, and today we are delighted to be joined by Freddie straight off, a few days after his epic performance in the marathon, which really was off the scale, so congratulations on that. But yes, you're here to talk about different things today, and very conscious that we've been very much focusing on cost of living impacts in the UK, so we thought we'd invite you along today to talk about what you've been seeing in wider Europe, and also building on your experience in the property consulting group. So today is a bit of a focus on Europe and the impact on the property market. So
thank you, Paul.
Tell us, what have you been sort of having conversations about recently?
We've had a lot of very interesting conversations about the move from 2019 to 2023. We've seen that people now have sort of written off that COVID time period, 2020, 21, 22, to comparing 2019, 2023, 2 full years now of new normal behaviours, for want of a better term. And a lot of interesting conversation on that around changes in consumers' behaviours and what that's impacted, how that has impacted how people are interacting with destinations. And there's a fairly consistent theme that we're seeing across our clients of footfall being down versus 2019, but turnover being up versus 2019 once we get into 2023 and looking at that full year. And that, I think, has often caused a bit of issue and a bit of almost a bit of anxiety amongst some of our clients about we need to get back to that 2019 footfall number, but we've seen that consumer behaviour has completely changed. We've looked at the behaviours of hundreds of millions of people across Europe, how they're interacting with spaces, and the way that we now shop is completely different. And so I think there needs to be a bit of a shift in people's mindsets of let's park that conversation on footfall and let's start really focusing on turnover and ensuring that we're driving turnover rather than worrying about how often or how many people are interacting with our destinations. Ultimately, yes, you do need to push that on, how often people are there, the number of people that are interacting with your space, but that's the key thing, is what they then spend in your centre. And that sort of shift towards turnover then is ultimately it's what's driving your rental income, which then ultimately is what's driving your asset value as well. And that's ultimately what we're trying to deliver to our clients. We're trying to grow their asset value. And so we've been supporting our clients a lot recently on that conversation of, how do we get more turnover into their centres?
And have you seen any kind of different trends in Europe compared to what we've seen in the UK? How has the comparison been?
I laugh because it's a bit of a yes and a no answer. I think last time I did one of these, I sat on the fence a lot, and I'm going to continue to do so here. We've seen there is a lot of consistent trends across Europe in that the way that people are behaving is seen. We're seeing less frequent trips to a destination, but then when people are visiting, they are spending more. It's almost like they're going with a list of items they want to go and buy, and they're going in, they're ticking that off on one single trip rather than going back a couple of times over the course of a week or course of a month.
And that rings a bell, doesn't it?
Yeah, and it's exactly what we've seen in the UK. And it's very interesting, that. And I think what we've seen is that a lot of our clients they are still seeing turnover growth with them, which is really encouraging. Yeah. But a lot of people have written that off versus inflation figures. They see inflation at 10%, but their turnover at 5%. And they think, well, actually that means we're net down 5%, we're behind where that is. But we've been trying to encourage people to break that mindset between looking at inflation and looking at turnover. Inflation is ultimately how much goods cost. It's not what people have to choose to spend at. And we're seeing across a number of countries that actually when you look at how much people are spending in destinations, whether that be a high street, an outlet centre, a retail park, a shopping centre, that actual in-store spend in the likes of Austria is down 3%, I think France is down 4%, Germany's down 5%, and there's very few countries where actually you've seen an increase in the amount people are spending in a physical retail destination from 2019 through to 2023. I think it's only really Poland that's seen that increase. Obviously it's on a slightly different growth trajectory than some of those more established economies, but also they've seen a big increase in their consumer confidence after the change in government last year, I think it was now. And that's sort of really helped their sort of a progression in their spending patterns post all the lockdown restrictions that people were having.
Just a question, what do you think is driving this? Is this, like you've talked about COVID and saying let's write that off, is this cost of living causing people to spend less and do fewer trips, or is it just this is an ongoing establishment of the internet? What?
I think you've hit the nail on the head. There's two key factors that are coming into play with it. One is inflation. Mm-hmm. We're seeing obviously significantly higher inflation than we have over the last 10, 15, 20 years.
Knocking cost of living confidence.
Yeah, exactly. And that inflation rises. Obviously, it's hitting the items that we buy every day, but then it's also affecting our bills. Mm-hmm. They're all increasing by RPI, for example. And then central banks are trying to encourage and control that inflation are increasing interest rates. That's increasing, obviously, our mortgages, or even if we're renting, it's increasing rental prices because landlords are putting it up to pay for their buy-to-let mortgages. Yeah. And so we've seen people's disposable incomes just be squeezed and squeezed and squeezed, and so something's got to give, and that is our discretionary spending that is giving. Yeah.
So you don't think those 2, 3, 4% of drop are moved to the internet? That is a straight loss to the economy, effectively.
I think there's a bit of both. To be fair, as you said, I think the key driver is the squeeze in the disposable income, but compared to 19, online spend is significantly higher. We have, interestingly, in a lot of countries seen online spend actually decrease from 2022 to 2023. Okay. We saw that sort of rampant growth in online spend over lockdown. Right. That nestled back down at a sort of a higher level over 21, over 22, but in 23 people are increasingly, I think, health confident to go out, go and shop. We still saw some of that hangover of COVID fears, etc., into 21, into 22, and again, it's why people are saying that 23 is our first year of new normal. Even though over the course of 2022 there was often limited, if any, lockdown restrictions at that point. It was more psychological at that point.
Yeah, I think people still tend to do list shopping and try and go physically to places when they're trying to save money as well, don't they? There's an element of control of actually being able to see every single transaction. There's no hidden costs for delivery and stuff, so you do tend to see that creep back up during these times as well.
Yeah, and as I said, I think that point around when people's incomes are squeezed, you're seeing that sort of that drop in online spend again, and we look at
the compulsive purchases that you might do in your pajamas on your sofa.
They disappear, and actually it's like, no, I don't need this. I'm going to go and make sure I get exactly the right item from a physical destination. Right, so I don't get money tied up in ordering a small, medium, large, that ultimately is money that you need at the end of the month or the start of the month to be paying those bills, etc., as you suddenly get your Monzo notification saying you don't have enough money in your account to pay your...
Sounds like you're talking from personal
there's a lot of experience there.
How do you deliver growth in this really, really difficult climate? It's a very hard question I'm conscious of.
It is difficult. I think going back to why we've seen this drop in footfall, but growth in turnover, what's driven that on, and that is the frequency with which people are shopping has declined. And I think that's a very, very difficult metric for landlords, commercial property owners, to start to change that. Instead, it becomes a customer acquisition challenge for them. And I think, again, talking from that property perspective, it's not an easy conversation to have, but I think that's an easier conversation to have for a landlord than it is for a brand. I know, Paul, from your world, for example, that I think in some of those brands, customer acquisition is almost the most expensive thing to do. Absolutely. Sort of my feeling on that is that that's often because there's more of a brand loyalty to actual brands rather than there is brand loyalty to a physical retail destination. People are less sort of tied into that emotive journey with a physical destination. It's the brands that are within it that drive it. So if you can deliver a destination that exactly meets what people want, that's when you can start to get that growth. And what we're seeing is those destinations that can deliver a clear proposition of what people want, that's where they can start to unlock those new shoppers. If they really know their customers, can provide that clear proposition, they can grow it. And it's those centres that have successfully done that, we're seeing them have that turnover growth, outperforming the market. I talked before about how in-store spend had dropped as various different countries across Europe. We've worked with clients that have delivered growth in those challenging markets because they know what their clients want, they identify who the shopper is, and they're pivoting and they're changing brand mix, they're changing the stories that they're pushing out in their marketing to unlock it.
So how are you actually doing that? How do you ground that sort of strategy work?
Yeah, it's a great question. There's sort of two key tools that we start to use on it. One is understanding how consumers are actually behaving, how are they interacting with the destination, and for that we need sort of actual data to see real world behaviours. And we use, typically speaking, a combination of mobile geolocation data, so looking at people's movements, where they live, where they work, where they choose to shop, where they choose to play, and then on top of that are often using client data as well to understand footfall levels, turnover levels, and by combining the two you get a very deep, rich insight into who our consumers are at any given destination, how they're interacting with it, how often they're visiting. And so that gives us this brilliant data set for understanding real world performance. The other side of that is you need to start to contextualise the performance to understand, right, yes, I know I'm performing as such, but once I contextualise the performance, where is there opportunity to grow? So we've to contextualise the performance, we've just re-released Retail Footprint Europe. We've significantly increased our coverage within that, so we've now got significantly more destinations within that, so often much more smaller, high street, local type destinations, which we know have become increasingly important over the years. And Retail Footprint is effectively, it's our digital mirror of the European retail landscape. It allows us to say, right, well, we know where everybody lives across Europe, we know all the retail destinations across Europe, and this is how we expect people to be interacting with them. So when we can compare that to our actual performance, as I say, measured using mobile geolocation data and our client data, we can start to say, right, in this area here, we're going to expect you to turn over 20 million euros. However, at the moment, we'll see that you're only turning over 15 million euros. So there's an opportunity to grow that by 5 million.
Yeah.
And when you combine that with other CACI data sets, so our demographic understanding of Europe, who people are, what they want, their lifestyle, their life stage, their attitudes, their sentiments, allows us to go, right, to unlock that 5 million, this is what we need to do. We need to talk about this message, we need to bring in these brands, we need to put these events on, and that then starts to go, right, what's feasible, what's within our budget. We know that our clients are being increasingly squeezed on their budget, and so what is the sort of the lowest hanging fruit for them to go out and target to generate that growth for them.
Yeah.
One of the, I think, the interesting conversations that we've also been having is sort of what are people looking for going forward over 2024, the rest of, and then moving into 2025. And Hannah, I know that you've done quite a bit of work on that recently, so it'd be interesting to hear from you.
Yeah, it really mirrors kind of everything we've been talking about. We've asked consumers what they'd like to see more of in their physical locations to make them visit more often, spend more money, and the answers tend to be the same really. It's more F&B, more leisure, less retail, and more of the local services and the things around the retail that add to that visit, make it more of an experience, to your point about experiences. And that's particularly driven by the young actually. So the young people in particular really want to see that growth in F&B provision, you know, nice restaurants, cafes, dessert parlours, you name it. And it's increasingly becoming, I think, the dominant reason why people actually visit a space in the first place. It's the retail can sometimes be secondary for some people, and I think we're catching up with that. But there are other reasons why people go to physical spaces. Yeah,
I suppose once you diversify your mix, you bring in your ice cream parlour now, it's another thing that someone can spend on, and again, it's helping you push on that turnover, create that.
And it's also the day parts as well, isn't it?
Exactly.
It's extending those.
Yeah, and providing that point of differential. When I wake up on a Saturday morning, am I going to go here or am I going to go here? If you know that you can get everything for that whole day, then that's only going to position you further ahead of the competitors.
Okay. Good stuff. Okay, well, thank you very much. Hope that you found our insights today useful. Next session we have is Alex McCulloch, who's going to be joining us. He's going to cover two things. One is the latest, a summary of our latest findings from our latest retail briefing that Hannah was involved in recently. And he's also going to talk about some new interesting work we've been looking at in terms of mortgage behaviours. So we hope you can join us for that. Look forward to seeing you soon.